Hello and welcome to the CNBC-TV18 special debate, the budget agenda. I'm Shereen Bhan. Every year, the media is accused of making too much of the union budget. But I think this is one year where no such accusation can fly, because it's not just the media, but domestic investors and foreign investors who are watching every move of the Modi administration like a hawk. At this point in time, expectations are running very high. Hope is in the air that the Modi government will deliver on the reform agenda, that the Modi government will bring India back on an 8% plus growth trajectory. Whether the beginnings will be made in this budget, that of course is the big expectation. Arun Jaitley does have a tough balancing act ahead of him to discuss expectations, realistic and imaginative. Joining us here is a very special panel. The President of the Confederation of Indian Industry, Ajay Sriram, Subir Gokar, and the former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, Suman Sinha, a man who's betting on India's energy and infrastructure sector, R.S. Sharma, the former Chairman and Managing Director of India's largest Maharatna ONGC, and in a short while from now we'll also be joined by tax expert of BMR Advisors, Mukesh Bhutani. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on CNBC-TV18. Mr. Sriram, before I talk to you about budget expectations, let me congratulate CII, because all your persistence and your lobbying to actually get the Companies Act changed seem to be working, because some changes have already been announced. In fact, as we speak, a draft notification has been issued by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, taking into consideration some of the suggestions that CII, for instance, has made. So, persistence paying off?
Well, I think we really appreciate that the government considered the views of CII with a very open mind. And to be honest with you, our objective is how to make it workable, practical to assist business growth. Our basic point is, please don't treat everyone like a crook. Please don't tarnish everyone with the same brush. The reality of life is, whether it's in corporate world or in the political world or in any world, there will always be black sheep. So don't look at everyone from a point of black sheep. Please look at it from the point of view of having laws by which you can take action. But the premise we have suggested and requested is move on the basis of trust, and where the corporate entity or whoever does not adhere to that, take action.
But more than the issue of suspicion and the lack of trust, this is really about the ease of doing business, because the Minister of State for Corporate Affairs, Nirmala Sitharaman, in a conversation with us here on CNBC-TV18, said that any changes to the Companies Act would be considered and would be taken forward only because the government believes that it will be easier to then transact and do business in India. So, do you believe that we are likely to see all of this being cleared by Parliament now that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has put its weight behind clarifications and possible amendments?
Well, I think, as you rightly said, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman has given it serious consideration. She's had meetings with us. Last Saturday, she arranged a full-day discussion with her full secretariat, with us on the same issues. And I think what's required, you rightly said, is clarity. Let there be clear laws, let there not be ambiguity, let there not be uncertainty what can be done and what can't be done. Let's know where we stand. And I think the government has been coming out with clarification periodically, which is a very positive sign. And I hope they continue coming out with more, because still there are many areas to be addressed. We've given that document on behalf of CI to many people in the government, and we are really happy that they're looking at it positively.
You know, speaking of meetings, I want to go back to a conversation that you and I had, and that was after you finished your meeting with the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley as part of the industry pre-budget consultation. Is it safe to assume that as far as tax SOPs are concerned, sweeteners are concerned, it is not going to be achhe din aa gaye as far as industry is concerned this time around in the maiden budget that Arun Jaitley presents?
You know, I think industry is not looking for SOPs per se. We're not looking for excise duty cuts across the board.
Be honest, you've already made a representation that the excise duty SOPs that were granted to sectors like auto should continue.
It should continue. So we're not saying give anything more. I think the important point is economic growth is required. India today, with last 2 years GDP growth rate, unless we get economic growth, we won't get jobs, we won't get government revenues going up, we won't get economic activity going up across the board, which is affecting the entire economy. So our request to the government is, please move positively for inclusive growth across the board, improve governance, focus on infrastructure, get the manufacturing sector moving fast. Please tackle inflation, because inflation is keeping interest rates too high, which are actually affecting economic growth again. And let's look at it in totality. But, you know, some of the areas, if you're talking of tax, the only thing we've suggested is for SEZs. please give MAT over there. Please consider something like that.
Which has been a long-standing demand that was made to the previous government
Because they
as well.
actually add value on the domestic front and for the export market.
So now I need a realistic answer before I move on to Shubir Gokaran. You've made certain recommendations in terms of the sweeteners, the SOPs that you would like to continue, what you would like to see happen as far as boosting manufacturing growth is concerned, which continues to be abysmal at this point in time. What does your gut tell you? Will the excise SOPs given to auto, for instance, continue? Will we finally see MAT being done away with for special economic zones?
I think the government is sympathetic. I think the government has appreciated the point that unless we revive economic activity, the economy will just keep going down. So I think they will look at these things with an open mind. I think they will look at all aspects to ease business activity, to increase investments, to increase a positive sentiment across the board, so that economic activity picks up across the board.
Okay. Shubir Gokaran, Ajay Sriram there making a pitch to revive investment to boost growth. One of the other aspects that this maiden budget of Arun Jaitley is going to have to consider is the path of fiscal consolidation and ensuring that that path is a credible one and that it is followed through. What are your expectations now as far as fiscal consolidation goes? Because the room for expenditure cuts is limited. It's perhaps too narrow at this point in time, especially given the fact that growth is right up there as far as their priorities are concerned. What kind of a balancing act do you envisage Arun Jaitley to do?
Well, rather than talk of expectations, let me talk about aspirations, because I think, this is a 1991 moment in that sense. This is the first year of a virtually guaranteed 5-year government.
Yeah.
There are no risks to its survival at all.
And he has the political mandate
so
to
you
take
can
tough
actually
decisions.
afford to take a long-term strategic view of the fiscal situation and not try and achieve everything in one budget. So rather than look at this budget alone,
Sure.
I think we've got to look at it as a process over some time, as happened in 91 when you had 2 or 3 budgets, all of which were very significant reform agendas, or saw very significant reform agendas being implemented. So I have five things which I think have to be done.
Sure.
One is transparency. I think we need to get a fix on what the fiscal situation actually is. Whatever the last government did, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether the numbers
What is the number that you're working with?
It doesn't matter to me. Maybe 4.6 is the right number, but I think we need to be absolutely clear.
Would your number be closer to 5?
No, it doesn't matter what it is. I think we need transparency.
Okay.
What the number is irrelevant. Everybody has to believe that it is the right number. That's what I think we need to do. Second is, on the expenditure side, there are 2 things which we need to, I think, put a lot of emphasis on. One is on the subsidy bill. There's no question that subsidies in toto have to be capped. I thought the 2012 budget did propose renewed FRBM with a cap on subsidies. I think that's a great idea. But even without the FRBM, a cap on subsidies, even if it's a voluntary cap, should be considered. And that means saying we put a ceiling on the total, but that gives us the flexibility to adjust across commodities. Again, following up on that, the streamlining of transfers. The direct benefit transfer scheme, all kinds of controversies, all kinds of implementation issues, that doesn't mean it's a bad scheme. I think to the extent that you're able to save on costs, save on leakages by direct transfers, we have to look at that. So you're achieving the same level of welfare with lower expenditure. I think that's a goal that...
So you don't necessarily see them pulling back on things like the NREGS, etc., which is what the minister has so far placed on record, that we're not going to move away from spending the amount that the UPA was, but we will look at better targeting and more efficient utilization.
Even if they achieve more effective targeting with a plan, with a strategy. It's not going to happen in one budget, but a strategy has to be put in place. The other 2 things which I think are very important, one is rebalancing expenditure from current to capital, from revenue to capital. We've really seen an enormous decline in the share of government money going to capital expenditure. And the peak was 23% in 2008. It's down in the last budget to about 11-12%. We need to see this climbing sharply, and this is where all of the infrastructure problems have essentially emerged from, because the government has not been putting enough money into infrastructure. We don't want to recapture the glory days of 3% growth, but even then, public investment is critical.
But do you see that they will make a start by upping public investment on physical infrastructure in this budget?
I think commitments will be made. I think commitments will be made based on some reduction in the subsidy bill. So I think there will be a direct transfer. I do hope, and this is an expectation or an aspiration, that disinvestment is given priority, and the money that comes from disinvestment is dedicated, not just going to the general budget, but dedicated to capex. I think that's a very important commitment that the government needs to make. And the last point is about legislations. The GST has to pass. The DTC, there are views on it, but I think some streamlining of direct taxes is important. How you do it is a secondary issue. And very, very important one, FRBM too has to begin with fiscal deficit cap, with revenue deficit cap, and a subsidy cap. I think these are the three elements that need to go into the FRBM version 2.
That's an impressive 5-point list that you put together for us. So, Martin, I'll come to you in just a bit, but I want to pick up on the issue of oil subsidies, R.S. Sharma, and jump to you because the news that we're picking up at this point in time is like the experiment with diesel, marginal monthly hikes. The government is perhaps going to bite the bullet and hike LPG and kerosene prices perhaps monthly in small doses. Do you think that the time has come now for this government to move forward? They have the political mandate. They don't have to be worried about numbers in Parliament. Do you believe that this is something that we are going to see happen, perhaps even before the budget?
Yes, of course. I feel this should have been started much earlier. Look at the diesel price increase. When ad hoc increases used to happen, 1 rupee, 2 rupee, there used to be a huge, strong reaction to that. And now, ever since they started this 50 paisa per month increase, it has been absorbed in the system and nobody hardly takes a notice. And fortunately, the under-recoveries came down less than 2 rupees per litre. But unfortunately, now again, the crude prices are moving up. So that gap is again widening. But sooner the better. They should start the same way for LPG, kerosene in small doses, but they should do it every month.
But will it be materially significant? I mean, what we're picking up at this point in time is that they're considering perhaps a 5 rupee hike per cylinder every month on LPG. Maybe between 50 paise to a rupee hike every litre on kerosene every month. We don't know if any of this will finally go through or not. But at least on things like LPG, where the under-recovery is 472 rupees per cylinder, and similarly, even as far as kerosene is concerned, over 40 rupees, do you believe that we need more aggressive intervention, or is that not going to be politically palatable, and hence we have to live with marginal doses?
I feel for the LPG, giving 5 rupees per month increase is quite, palatable. It will get accepted. I recall way back when Mr. Mani Shankar Iyer was the minister, for LPG he had suggested every month 5 rupees increase. The Petroleum Ministry had cleared it, but somehow political clearance did not come. So it did not go through. I feel the sooner they do, the better it is. Otherwise, we are only getting more and more, entangled into this subsidy regime, and this fiscal consolidation kind of agenda will not happen. Exchange rate is not in our competence. Oil prices are not in our control. So probably these are some of the measures. They should do it consistently and with a clear message.
Let me ask you one final question before I get Sumant in on this conversation. Gas prices, and that's been the biggest controversy staring this government. We expect a decision to be taken shortly, but do you believe that a staggered approach, given the controversy, is perhaps best for gas pricing as well? And do you believe that that is perhaps the route that the government will follow? Also, now that you're no longer the chairman and managing director of ONGC, do you believe the Rangarajan formula should be junked, or do you believe the Rangarajan formula should be taken forward?
I have maintained from the beginning Rangarajan committee formula is perfectly balanced. Nothing wrong with that. But let me also speak on behalf of the consumer. Giving such a quantum increase, 50 or 100% increase of prices, is not going to get absorbed in the system. I know the resistance coming from fertilizer lobby, the power lobby, and the others as well. Why not start the same way? In fact, the question you have asked, just a week before in the business world, I have given precisely these statements. Right now, they let the consumer price be between $6 to $7, slowly and slowly aligned to the producer price.
Okay.
There are two things. One is price, other thing is value. let the producer get the value as determined by the Rangarajan committee.
Okay.
And the price for the consumer, it is for the call by the government, what price they would like to charge, to what extent subsidize, and when make price reaching near the value.
So you would advise a staggered approach as far as gas pricing is concerned. Sumit Sinha, over to you now. Infrastructure and energy, both these sectors are high on the priority list of the Modi administration. Clearly expectations are running high. Do you believe that this is going to be a case of expecting too much and perhaps not being able to see them deliver as much as the hopes have been built up?
Well, you know, I think Subir was right when he said that this is almost an aspirational moment in time. And of course, he alluded to 1991, and that automatically ratchets up the expectations even further. You know, I think that given the mandate that Mr. Modi has, I think it's but natural to have, you know, sky-high expectations, and especially given the hole that we've sunk ourselves into. I think as far as energy and infrastructure is concerned, certainly those have to be critical areas of this government's focus, and they have in fact...
24/7 electricity is a promise that the Power Minister Piyush Goyal is making. He's met with bankers, he's met with the Power Producers Association. Do you really see 24/7 electricity being a reality anytime soon? And I'm not talking about the next 12 to 24 months even.
No, I agree with you. I think it's going to take time, but you know, it could happen in a 5 to 10 year time frame is my expectation. But certainly, I think before that, you know, the kind of deficits that we have, particularly in the peak months, those are things that can certainly be addressed. I think the issues really are, and these are really in some senses go beyond the budget, really the other process issues, you know, things like land acquisition issues, the ease of getting approvals and doing business. I think those are things that perhaps can't really be addressed in the budget, but are absolutely critical in creating the right...
I'm going to interrupt you because on the issue of the land acquisition, and this has been something that industry once again has been lobbying with the government, and we do have the minister on record to CNBC-TV18 saying that while they will not touch the compensation clause, the acquisition clauses will perhaps be tweaked because it's too complicated to go through with. Do you anticipate changes in the Land Acquisition Act as early as the budget session?
You know, I would hope so, and I think what she's touched upon really is the key issue, which is the fact that the whole timeline is just too long. And if it takes 4 or 5 years to acquire land for any project, then clearly no project is going to get off the ground. So if she can actually, or if the government can actually tweak that process and make it a lot shorter and make it much more visible in terms of the total expanse of time required, I think that will be a significant win. Now, whether it happens in the budget session or subsequently, I do hope it is one of the first things that the government does do.
Ajay Sriram, are you hopeful that the Land Acquisition Act and changes to the Land Acquisition Act to make the process simpler and less complex, we will perhaps see this government taking forward in the budget session, which is what the minister on record seems to have stated to us?
I think the government is very aware. They want to take it up. I've heard 2 things. One, that they are looking at making changes on the time schedule.
Yeah.
But the planned time itself is 56 months, which is almost 5 years, if everything moves on time.
Yeah.
And I think the second they're also seeing is, can they give the states more power to take decision on the land acquisition part of it, rather than only moving by the law which has been promulgated at the center. So I think if they can give the states more freedom and allow them to set up their own systems to get the land, I think that itself will be easier as a first phase to start finding solutions. And I think each state will start competing with each other like we're seeing.
We could see a solution?
I think we will see something coming fairly soon.
We will see something coming fairly soon. Mukesh Bhutani, let me bring you in on this conversation, because the hope at this point is that this government will actually do whatever it takes to woo investors, domestic and foreign. As far as FDI is concerned, we understand that whether it's railways, it's construction, we could perhaps see the government moving, and even defense moving fairly quickly. In fact, I want to bring up the fact that today the UNCTAD has put out a report where India has actually slipped a notch on the FDI ranking to number 4. Crucial to attracting investment is going to be how this government deals with the retrospective tax law. Do you believe that we are going to see clarification, amendments in the budget?
I hope the government repeals the retrospective law, but it's speculation at this point in time whether they will do it or not. I think the question before the government would be, are they going to sacrifice the medium to long term for the sake of short term? A law which has been validly passed by the parliament, it is a real challenge. So somebody has to really walk the talk and say, I'm going to make this environment more business friendly and really repeal the law. I think if the government does that, That's the right thing to do, because in the short term they may
Place
have to
your
forego.
bets. Do you see them moving as far as repealing, or do you see them making clarification?
I would put a 60-40 in favor of repealing the law, because I think the government knows very well the kind of impact this has caused and the hemorrhage in the FDI figures that we have seen in the last 2 to 3 years. Because you see, if you look at it from a business standpoint, not just from a foreign investor standpoint, nobody wants to get into the technical nuances of, what did the Supreme Court say in Vodafone or any other case, but they are looking at certainty and stability of the law.
Yeah.
So the actions of the government in the last 3 to 4 years doesn't suggest that they want certainty and stability, and that's the larger message that they have to communicate by repealing the law.
So in that context then, do you expect this government to do anything which would suggest a U-turn? I mean, publicly they've stated that they will not allow FDI in multi-brand retail, but do you see them doing a U-turn on the stated policy?
See, I think that there is a lot, when you look at any law, whether it's an FDI or a business law or a tax law, there are two aspects to the law. One is the legislative part of the agenda, that the figure and the facts that go into the finance bill. Second is the administrative part of the agenda. So if you look at tax as a simple regulation, I don't think we need any legislation. I don't think we can do without a direct tax code.
Sure.
The question is, we need deeper administrative reforms. How do you really improve the functioning of the administration? How do you treat the taxpayer as a customer? How do you revamp the large taxpayer unit, which contribute to 60-70% of the corporate tax collections in the country? So I think you need deeper administrative reforms than any form of legislative changes insofar as investor regulations.
What measures do you think he is likely to initiate to bring up the tax to GDP ratio, which is currently declined to 10%?
Again, he has to take a medium to long-term view. If he takes a short-term view and focuses solely on the fisc, then I think he's going to have a challenge. We are seeing that the GDP figures are not going to necessarily yield to him the necessary uplift in the corporate tax collection. He has to be more realistic on the tax collections, because the tax collection figures are not going to be good. We have seen a continuous past 3 budgets where the finance ministers have I think more than the slippage, I think they've overestimated the revenues. So I think he needs to be driven more by realism. So I like this statement that we are going to edge to a 6 to 6.5% growth rate in the next 2 to 3 years. You're not trying to, give out figures which seem to suggest an over-optimistic scenario. I think he will probably replicate the same thinking insofar as his tax collection is concerned, which means that in the short term, he will have a situation where the fiscal deficit figure is not going to look. But I also feel that there would be some kind of a medium to long-term plan, some kind of a fiscal responsibility and budget management act figures coming back. I think that's a likely scenario. But so I think unlikely he will overestimate the tax collection figures.
Okay, unlikely that he's going to overestimate the tax collection. Shubir Gokaran, this was one of the points that you raised. And the fear is that what a rating agency is going to say if he doesn't stick to the fiscal deficit number that was laid out in the previous budget. Will they be satisfied if, as Mukesh Bhutani and you pointed out earlier, he lays out a very clear roadmap of what this government intends to do to perhaps get to a 5% national fiscal deficit over the next 3 years?
I think so. I think the credibility of a fiscal commitment now is very high because there is no political threat. There is no factor visible that, except for external developments, a shock, energy shock or something like that, which will sort of likely derail these commitments. So this is the space that this government has, which it has to use as effectively as possible. It has the space to make long-term commitments. It has the space to introduce changes over a sequence, rather than trying to address every problem at once because the situation is so desperate. So if there is credibility, if there is transparency, if there is a clear commitment to fiscal reform over a period of time, I don't think that should prove to, that should threaten perceptions of India's sovereign fiscal situation.
Okay.
That luxury is something which I think we're not recognizing because we haven't had it for so long.
Yeah.
But it is extremely important, and it has to be used as creatively as possible.
We've been talking about the fiscal deficit, but let me ask you about the other deficit, and that is the current account deficit. We've managed to tame that quite significantly, but do you believe the time has now come to reverse, for instance, the restrictions that were brought in for gold imports, which is the big wish of the Commerce Ministry, but I know in the Finance Ministry the view is that we shouldn't mess around just yet?
I think with certain threats looming, for example, the monsoon is at this point looking like something of a threat. Iraq is uncertain and may have an impact on crude prices. It's best not to sort of, rush into anything at this point. Let's keep in mind that the structural problem, the current account deficit, has not gone away. We are still importing enormous amounts of coal, and if we're talking about any kind of recovery, our power demand and therefore our imported coal demand will go up, because we are not seeing signs of, increases in domestic coal production. We are not exporting a lot of iron ore. Iron ore prices have dropped substantially in any case, so even if we were to resume exports, our realizations will be less. So there is a big problem on the current account which has not gone away, and I don't think
So you don't believe the time has come for any reversal at this point in time, and we need to keep our guard up?
There is a signaling sort of value to say, okay, things are a little less oppressive than they were a year ago, so maybe we can, signal that rollback. But I think to say, look, everything's back to normal and we can go about, go about our business as usual, I think that's premature.
Okay.
There are lots of external threats, not very significant at this point, but they are there, and I think we should be conscious of those.
Sumant, this government is talking about an integrated energy policy. The previous government also spoke about an integrated energy policy. Let's see how far we get this time around. But things like opening up the coal sector and coal sector reforms, big on the agenda. We've heard the Minister, we've heard the Prime Minister talk about it. Do you finally see the monopoly of Coal India being broken? Do you perhaps expect this government to make any announcement about that in the budget?
I think what is very critical in this budget is not just the actual numbers for this particular year, but also the long-term roadmap that the FM lays out, and whether in fact it does lay out a long-term roadmap. Because as Subir said, the issue is going to be really about what is the commitment for the future. And I think if the commitment for the future is strong and it is backed by the political mandate, then in fact, even if this year's numbers look a little bit not so good, the fiscal deficit, I think people are going to give it a go-by. I think as far as the energy side is concerned, it's great, first of all, that we have one single minister across coal, power and renewable energy, because there are lots of issues between all the three ministries and areas that are common. For example, grid issues, grid integration issues, the issues around the financial health of the distribution companies, the fact that most distribution actually is in the hands of state governments and in fact should be privatized over time. So when you look at the power sector as a whole, almost 70 to 80% of it is still in the hands of different parts of the government. And so there's a lot of things that can be done. And you mentioned Coal India privatization. That's one of those things.
Not Coal India privatization, but opening up the coal sector. I don't think they're thinking as far as Coal India privatization just yet.
Why should they not think in those, in those...
Well, since you're talking aspiration, sure, that could be an aspiration, but Mukesh Mutani is talking about realism and a realistic budget.
Over a 4-5-year period, I think it is eminently possible for them to say, okay, look, let's split Coal India into 4 different organizations, and then over time let them compete geographically. The same thing, of course, can be done with railways, but that's a separate story. And then, of course, the whole area of distribution privatization, which, in fact, the Power Minister did talk about as well, as being one of the areas that requires fundamental reform. Because along with that is the whole issue of how much you charge customers or consumers. And that ultimately, if that doesn't go up, then any of these fixes are going to be temporary in nature. Ultimately, energy prices in India have to absolutely go up, not just on the oil and the crude side, but also on the actual power side. So that, I think, has to happen. And, given that it's a concurrent subject, ultimately state governments have to be cajoled into moving power prices up.
And he's now